Good evening and welcome all of you. My name is Farzana Sheikh and I'm an Associate Fellow here at Chatham House. And before I introduce our guests for this evening, and indeed our agenda for this evening, can I please ask all of you to turn off your mobile phones? Please don't set them on silent, because even setting them on silent tends to interfere with the audio equipment we've got in this room. I'd also like to announce that today's speakers will be speaking on the record. So, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me very great pleasure here today to have in our midst a team of Pakistan's finest journalists who have all made their mark as some of the most astute, perceptive, and independent-minded commentators of this complex country. Our guests: television anchor Katrina Hussein, freelance columnist Mustafa Qadri, newspaper editor Rahimullah Yusufzai, and documentary filmmaker Bina Sarwar have set themselves a formidable challenge. For they aim to wrestle with and hopefully resolve for us today that most thorny question that plagues us all. Does Pakistan have an image problem? And if so, why? Does the country's unenviable reputation as the most dangerous place in the world stem from ill-founded perceptions encouraged by a hostile media abroad? Or is it, in fact, rooted in the realities of present-day Pakistan? And it is precisely this gap between perceptions and realities with regard to Pakistan that will set the agenda for today's meeting, and that will be addressed by each of our speakers before, of course, we broaden this discussion to encourage questions from the floor. So without any further ado, let me hand over to Mustafa Qadri on my left.
Can I stand up over there?
You may, if
Thank
you
you.
wish, certainly.
Thank you, Farzana. I really appreciate you for your warm welcome to us, and I'd like to thank Chatham House and Mr. Kashif Zafar for basically making this event possible. I suppose you, Farzana, have thrown the gauntlet down to us. Everyone wants to know what's happening in Pakistan. I suppose we'll try our best to try to demystify Pakistan. I'm an independent journalist based in Pakistan. I write for a number of agencies, including The Guardian, The Australian, and Radio National Australia. I also organised this event and two other events later in the week. The aim behind that was, well, in a way simple, in a way not so obvious. At the moment, there's so much interest in Pakistan, and it's very common to have events discussing Pakistan with experts on the country in London and other international capitals. But one thing I find which is quite sparse is an event where thoughtful Pakistanis, and only thoughtful Pakistanis, talk about their country. And that's basically why I organised this event today. When I set about to do this task, I thought we needed to have really professional, the best journalists available in Pakistan. People who are the best in their field, veteran journalists, and people who really report from the front line. And that's why we have Katrina, Bina, and Rahimullah with us today. So hopefully I can get all of this right. I'll just give you a very brief introduction to who they are. Katrina Hussein is one of the most eloquent voices on Pakistani television. Her Siyasi Log current affairs program is required viewing for anyone interested in Pakistan's domestic or international happenings. She has interviewed British Foreign Secretary William Hague, US Secretary of Defence Robert Gates, and former US Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. And of course, she's interviewed most of Pakistan's senior politicians and analysts. Tonight, she will be briefly talking to you about avoiding the narrative that plays on militants' strengths. She'll basically unpack the idea that the current discourse actually promotes what the militants' agenda is and in a way stops us and Pakistan from finding a solution. We also have with us Bina Sarwar. She is an award-winning journalist and documentary filmmaker who has reported extensively on human rights, gender, and the democracy movement in Pakistan. She is currently involved in a peace initiative between two of the largest media companies in India and Pakistan. Bina is also renowned for having some of the freshest insights into the subcontinent's oldest problems. She'll be talking briefly about prospects for peace between India and Pakistan, particularly with respect to her work in Aman Ki Asha, the program between the two media companies in India and Pakistan. And lastly, but not leastly, we have Rahimullah Yousafzai. For 30 years, he has been on the pulse of what's been happening between Afghanistan and Pakistan. He was the first to report on the Taliban movement in Kandahar and has interviewed Taliban chief Mullah Umar and Al-Qaeda head Osama bin Laden on several occasions. He is basically the go-to man for international media trying to understand and report on one of the most mysterious insurgencies in modern history. I think it's fair to say that journalists, both from abroad but also in Pakistan, are at the forefront of trying to understand the country. I think it's also fair to say that Pakistan's media is the most powerful popular institution in the country. At its best, it keeps the powerful accountable and gives a voice to the voiceless. At its worst, it has been accused of scaremongering and rabble-rousing. I hope tonight we can unpack these contradictions and avoid the easy and usual stereotypes. Again, I thank you all, and I thank Chatham House for having us.
Well, I think we'll now turn to Katrina to set the ball rolling.
Right. I'm going to, because I pace, so I think it's better if I'm standing.
Okay.
Good evening, and thank you so much for taking time out to come and hear our views and share and exchange some ideas. My biggest concern these days, as I continue to live and work in Pakistan, is that whenever I talk to people who have never visited Pakistan or know very little about it, is the fact that everything they really know about that country is shaped by militancy, by terrorism and violence. If you ask anybody to free associate and you say the word Pakistan, they're going to say terrorist. It's jihad central. It's all those other words that are put out there. And the problem with that is that there are 180 million people living in that country. And you can put any number you want on the number of terrorists. You want to say 500,000, 1 million, that's still a fraction of the number of people who live in that country. Yet that fraction, that minority, has become the voice of the entire country. And I'm not saying at this point that there's no terrorism and violence in Pakistan. You see it in your newspapers every day. We live with it. We go through it every day. We deal with it. Our lives are shaped by it in many ways. But what is concerning me increasingly is that as I talk to younger Pakistanis, teenagers, people who are in their early 20s, I'm beginning to see this sort of a very conservative, reactionary attitude developing in the educated, younger, I hate the word elite, of Pakistan, which didn't exist when I was a teenager. And that was a long time ago, I realize that. But it's changing. And Pakistan is changing in ways that is scary and difficult to understand, even for those of us who live there. And part of the problem that I have been seeing, that I'm seeing, is that this concept of Pakistan being the world's terror capital, the perception that Pakistan is the terrorism exporting capital of the world, all of which has some validity. We all know Faisal Shahzad came to Pakistan and got training there. We know the 7/7 bombers came to Pakistan, and there are links, yes, but that is not the entire country. And by painting the entire country with the same brush, you are, in effect, pushing people into becoming very defiant and defensive about who they are and what they stand for. I have young teenagers coming to me and talking to me about their Muslim identity, and I'm going, huh? It was something we took for granted when we were growing up. It was, we breathe, we're Muslims, so big deal. And today, this extreme increase where my friends' teenage daughters are now wearing hijab, and the mothers don't, and never did. So it's a sort of a reaction to what they are seeing as a challenge, perhaps, to them. Now, these are ideas, these are thoughts. I'm exploring this. I'm not saying that this is definitive and this is fact. But that is something that I think we need to be concerned about. We need to think about how we perceive a country and how we portray it so that it shouldn't become, the perception shouldn't become the reality. And that's what, in many ways, I think is happening. Add to that the frustrations of living in a country where the economic crisis is extreme. With the floods that have ripped through the country this year, and I cannot even begin to describe to you in a minute or two what absolute devastation and destruction we have witnessed. Entire villages wiped out, miles and miles and miles of cropland that is still standing water, beautiful lush green and burnt black at the base because they're rotting in the water. 2 growing seasons, history, rehabilitation and relocation of 20 million people in a country that had 48% food insecurity before the floods. So you can imagine the challenge that we're facing. And when I say we, this is each and every one of us who lives there. Because everybody got together and worked as hard as could, and everything and the world has helped. I mean, I would thank every single person who's helped, because we still need all the help we can get. Now, compound that with the fact that we've had a power shortage in the country for 2-3 years that has been so extreme that it has absolutely devastated Pakistan's biggest revenue earner, which is textiles and cotton fabrics. Entire factories have shut down, so unemployment is on the rise. And inflation is spiraling, and post-floods, basic food, potatoes and onions and everything has doubled in price over a period of 2 months. So we're talking a country that is going through paroxysms of desperation, of frustration, of anger. And that anger, I fear, could result in a backlash, not just against the state and the representatives of the state, but everybody who has and those who do not have. And I, for one, will not blame them in the least, because we have pushed them and we continue to push them into places where they simply cannot recover. And I'd be happy to go into more detail. I'm trying to just give you a broad strokes opinion over here. And I'm assuming all of you, here are reasonably aware of what Pakistan is, but Pakistan's media, which Farzana mentioned, one of the things that you hear about, you see bearded men, you see veiled women. You don't see Pakistan's amazing music scene. You don't see Pakistan's amazing dance and fashion. Pakistan Fashion Week has started, and it was pretty riveting stuff for those of us. Okay, I'm not saying that fashion, for example, represents all of Pakistan, just like London Fashion Week doesn't represent everybody who lives in Britain. But it is the other extreme that just simply doesn't get seen, and the huge bulk in between. The kid who goes to work in the bank, the girl who works as a receptionist, a farmer who's worried about the crop. Who's listening to them? Do they matter? The more we ignore them, the more we create a vacuum which is being filled by militancy. And compounded with failure of governance, we are looking at a Pakistan that could conceivably be more dangerous 2 to 5 years from now than it currently is. I'll leave it there, and I'll take questions whenever anyone has them.
Thank you, Katrina. Bina, your turn.
Should I go up there?
Wherever.
Well, I'll just
sit there,
okay, as long as people can hear me.
They should be able to if your mic's working.
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Well, this all that Katrina said, all that Rahimullah Yusufzai is going to say. There's just so much about Pakistan. I mean, this is a very limited time, and I've been asked to speak about the India-Pakistan equation, which is something that I'm working on these days. So I'll just tell you very little bit about that. Should I just say a little bit about the initiative that I'm working on so that you have an idea of what it is? It's called Aman Ki Asha, which means the hope for peace. And it is a campaign for peace between the 2 largest media groups of India and Pakistan, the Jung Group of Pakistan and the Times of India. And this is the first time that 2 media groups in both countries have joined hands for any campaign. On January 1st, when the campaign was launched, there was an editorial on the front page of the Jung publications, as well as the News, as well as the Times of India, that was written jointly. That was, this was the first time ever in the history of India and Pakistan that they had a joint editorial. It was on the front page. Times of India carried a front page advertisement saying, "Love Pakistan," and they carried a series of such advertisements and so on. And so it started with this bang. And it was preceded with a poll that was conducted in December, asking identical questions in India and in Pakistan about what people felt about, things like the Kashmir issue or relations between the two countries and all of that. And there were surprising findings. For example, many of the people in India, the people polled, I forget the exact figure, but it was about 60% perhaps, who felt that the Indian government should engage with Pakistan on Kashmir and should discuss this. And everybody was surprised, because the feeling that you get, the perception you get in the media and everywhere else, is that nobody in India wants to discuss Kashmir, and they certainly don't want to involve Pakistan in it. So there were many surprising findings in that survey. About India and Pakistan, I think most of you probably would know what the problems are between the two countries. Just very briefly to recap, is that we've fought 3 full-fledged wars. We've fought one warlike situation, which was, as it was called, the Kargil, in Kargil, right after the nuclear testing. And but we have continued to stay in a state of hostilities. We have continued to stay in a warlike situation, because of which we have war economies. We have economies that are geared towards militarism, weaponization, and feeding the, basically shoring up the army. And the food insecurity that Katrina mentioned is put by the wayside, and security is seen only as border security vis-a-vis India. That is now changing slowly. There is a discourse within both countries, and I think Aman Kiasha has contributed to that, where we're saying that security is not just military, is not just about border security, and it's not just about securing your borders. You have to have the things like employment and food security and education and all of that. The hostile relations that India and Pakistan have mean that it's as the country next door to Pakistan, as Pakistan's big neighbor, with these floods that have devastated the country. 1/5 of the country is still underwater, even as the floodwaters are receding. But 1/5 of the country, from the north to the south, just a huge area of land is underwater still. And we've received so many queries from India, people wanting to know, how can we help? What can we do? They want to send food, they want to send medicines, they want to send doctors, people want to come and help. But because of the relationship that we have, Pakistan government is not allowing that, is not tapping into that resource. And the aid that India offered was accepted after some dithering, and it was finally accepted, but they said you have to go through the UN and all of that. So the relationship between India and Pakistan colors even a humanitarian crisis as big as the floods, which is the biggest catastrophe ever to hit Pakistan and probably any other country in the world. The situation between India and Pakistan is such that we don't have tourist visas between the two countries. I cannot visit India as a tourist. Nobody can come from India to visit as a tourist in Pakistan. So that we don't know about each other. So the misconceptions, the perception that Katrina talked about of the image of Pakistan, think Pakistan, you think terrorism. Well, next door to Pakistan, right there in India, people turn around and when we went in May for an economic conference, and we went to the Women's Press Club, and we were sitting there were several of us, and many of us were women, and a journalist at the Indian Women's Press Club said, I'm surprised to see so many women in your delegation. I thought that you guys all were, in Parda or something. And, we just burst out laughing, because what do you do? These are people, they are like our alter egos. India and Pakistan is like two sides of the same coins. Our militants, we have our militants, yes, but there's this, what they call the Saffron terror in India. Terrorism is terrorism. It doesn't have a color, green, red, yellow, whatever. It's criminalized. It's criminal behavior. It's and it's then blamed on religion or whatever. But it's really basically just that. It's criminal behavior which needs to be dealt with through the law and order situation. And India and Pakistan could cooperate and really make a lot of headway on the issue of terrorism, because that is the one major sticking points that we have during the talks with India and Pakistan, that they always talk about terrorism, but they aren't willing to concede that we have suffered more under terrorism, quote-unquote terrorism, than any other country in the world. We've lost thousands of lives, not just military, but also civilian to that. And as long as India keeps us at arm's length and does exactly what the West is doing, which is, you're not doing enough, do more, and all of that, instead of cooperating with us, helping to strengthen our democratic, political, processes, then unless that happens, we're not going to really make any real headway in that situation. So, in a nutshell, the real threat to Pakistan comes not from India, which is where our entire, our conditioning all these years has been, that India is the enemy. Textbooks, media, everything has been geared towards portraying India as an enemy. The economy has been, the military, everything. And we have to face the real threat within, which is not just the militancy and the jihadis, but also all the things that are allowing that to flourish, which include food insecurity and unemployment and lack of education and all of that. So in a way, I think that if Pakistan and India were to behave as normal neighbors and, live in peace, we could really make a lot of headway in really taking care of all of these issues. So I'll end there, and there's, so much more to say, but hopefully a lot of it will come out during the discussion afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Beena. Well, Rahimullah, now you will tell us about that real threat within, won't you?
Yes, I think I'll talk about the reality of Pakistan, because as a reporter, I have been covering this area for so many years, and my space is becoming limited. I could go to every place. I could interview Osama bin Laden twice. I could meet Mullah Umar. I could travel in all the tribal areas in Afghanistan, but now I can't do that. If I leave Peshawar, where I'm based, and I go to Khyber tribal area, which is the link with Afghanistan, I have to think twice. It is becoming so dangerous to do actual reporting. You are depending on secondary sources. You can't do primary on-the-spot reporting anymore. So difficult. Which means you won't know the real situation. The reality is so terrible, I must say. But I tell you that the people living in the tribal areas in FATA, you have heard about Waziristan. It's always in the news. But if you go to Waziristan, and I have been there very often, North Waziristan, South Waziristan, the people are just normal people, just like us. I am myself a Pashtun. I belong to Mardan, near Peshawar. In Waziristan, in all the tribal areas, there have been polls. People have been asked about their biggest concerns. And they say, we want to educate our children. We want to have better roads. We want to have electricity. And I tell you, they don't like militants. They don't like Taliban. If some people are still supporting them, it is out of fear, or because the government has let them down. The government is not there to try and help the people. It's because maybe people are being held hostage in these places. If they get a choice, I'm sure they will not support Taliban. They will just rebel against them. They will support the government. But the government has to actually do something more. It has been a story of neglect. For 63 years, these tribal areas have been neglected. And I tell you, this is the most underdeveloped area of Pakistan in every respect. The perceptions have changed. We ask the people in tribal areas, the tribal elders, common people, they will tell you that we want girls' schools. In the past, they would oppose girls' schools. Now, if the governor, if the army chief, if the president goes to the tribal areas, one of the main demands is that we want girls' schools. We want roads. In the past, they would say, if the government builds roads, then the roads will bring the government. The government will come and we will lose our independence. Now people want roads. They want electricity. They want development. But the government has failed them. That's why there are problems. I think we need to help the tribal people to come out of the situation. That's very important. And it cannot be done in isolation. There has to be a lot of inputs by everybody. It's not only the Pakistan government. I think the whole world needs to help the tribal people. It's about 6 million people. 6 million people who are being held hostage. And this area, as you know, has become the center of militants, of terrorists. They operate across the border also in Afghanistan. And in a way, it's a sanctuary now for many people who can easily cross the border. So that's the real problem there. But I tell you that in the whole province, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, formerly Northwest Frontier Province, people are fed up of violence. People are fed up of militancy. But people also are angry with the government. And we already had 1.6 million displaced people in my province. It was before the floods. Now we've got more people displaced. And all of these people need help to go back to their villages and their homes. Even those people who were displaced earlier, last year in March and April, during the military operation in Swat and Malakand, those people have gone back, most of them, but they have not been helped yet with the damages to their houses and properties. They were only paid one installment of 25,000 rupees as an emergency help, but they haven't been supported to rebuild their houses, to revive their lives, to revive their livelihoods. That needs to be done. But that needs resources, which Pakistan does not have. And then we have these other people who have been displaced by floods in the Peshawar Valley, in Swat, and in other parts of the province. So we have these acute problems. I don't think that the Pakistan government has the capacity or even the will to try and help these people. The world community has been of some help, but that's inadequate. It's not enough. We have many issues of credibility of the government, and that's one reason why there's not enough help. But I think that if the people are left alone and they're not helped, then there will be many problems with which Pakistan will not be able to cope. We have an insurgency in Balochistan. We had 5 military operations, and even now, the Baloch people or the people who are fighting the state, they are not willing to negotiate now with the government of Pakistan. The Pakistan government has been offering talks, there have been reforms, there have been incentives, but the Baloch people are not buying that. So we have problems in Balochistan, insurgency in the Northwest Frontier Province, tribal areas, and we have now this flood which has displaced so many people. I think that Pakistan is in a very bad situation, and we have not been able to resolve our problems with India. We have economic issues, we have political instability, we have lack of trust in Pakistan, also in the government. That gives an opportunity to the military to fill the vacuum. And the military, actually, the military's image was really very bad under Musharraf. But now the military's image has improved a lot because of the military operations against militants and also because of the military's work, relief work, during the floods. So I am afraid that if the government falters, if the government is not able to do enough, then I think that there will be an opportunity for the military to take over any time. But I think the military at this stage is not in any mood to take over because there are so many problems which even the military will not be able to cope with. So we expect the civilian government, democratic government, to remain in power, but the government must improve its performance. But in the end, I will just say that people in Pakistan, I must say 170 million or even more. They are just normal people. We have militancy, we have all these issues, we have terrorism, but I think the majority, the huge majority, they want peace, they want security, they want good governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think one thing that can be safely said is that if there were any misapprehensions, any misperceptions about a culture of denialism in Pakistan, you're not going to find it here amongst our panelists, because what we've had this evening is really, I think, quite an honest exposition of Pakistan and its troubles. And I just really, want to kick off by making a couple of observations before we throw this out to the audience. I mean, one of the interesting things about Pakistan in sort of the larger scheme of things is why, as Katrina was emphasizing in her talk, issues of identity, particularly issues of identity, should have become and surfaced so ferociously in a country that is, after all, a Muslim majority country. And, to sort of Islamize the Muslim is a phenomenon that we are seeing in Pakistan, which has really brought with it, in its train, immense problems. And I think that's something that we're going to need to wrestle with. What is it in Pakistan that has caused issues of Muslim identity, or the issue of Muslim identity, to resurface in the way that it has? For Bina, I think the question that came to my mind is, while I agree entirely with what you said and the way you sort of presented the difficulties that face us both in India, in Pakistan, when we set about stereotyping each other, is really the way in which a single event can, undo the work of decades. I mean, of course, here I have in mind the attacks in Mumbai in November 2008. And I think the damage wrought by those attacks, the fact that nobody in Pakistan was able at that time to stand up and say with the Indians that today we are all Indians, just as, for example, the French did when 9/11 happened, saying today we're all Americans. I think that would have somehow salvaged the situation. In the event, there was total silence.
No, that's not exactly.
Perhaps not. But this is purely provocative, because the impression is that in Pakistan there has been an unwillingness to acknowledge the damage done by Mumbai, the degree to which we, to a greater or lesser degree, have all been implicated in those attacks. And of course, I mean, Rahimullah raises that difficult question about the balance between security and development, particularly in the tribal agencies. I mean, how do you go about ensuring that these most neglected regions of Pakistan can develop in the way some other parts in Pakistan have had the privilege to develop, without ensuring a minimum degree of security? And that's really a conundrum that we have not yet been able to solve. What is the right balance between security, very often heavy-handed, and the urgent need for development? So with that, half provocative and half serious, I'm going to throw it up for broader discussion. And what I want to do here really is to try and take questions evenly across the room. So perhaps we'll give the chaps at the back first say, then move to the front, then to the right and to the left. If you could identify yourself and then state your affiliation. And of course, if you have a question that you want to put to any one particular panelist, please do so. But make it a question and not a speech or a commentary, please, because we have very little time. 20 minutes to be precise. The gentleman there.
Thank you. Vikram Dodd from The Guardian. I just wanted to ask you, does any part of the Pakistani state, in your opinion, work or come close to working? And just
Does any what? I'm sorry?
Any part of the Pakistani state.
Pakistani state.
Work. Does it work?
Work or come close to working. And the other point is, given the, I'm of Indian background, Pakistanis are basically my brothers and sisters, but there is that whole divide which we've talked about. Given recent events such as the revelation in the Woodward book that America threatened to attack Pakistan if the bomb in Times Square had gone off, I just wonder from that and other discussions, how much trouble do ordinary Pakistanis or the intelligentsia realise that they are as a country, as in, they are flitting in and out of the sort of place Western governments talk behind the scenes about having, serious plans to attack or take military action against. How serious do they view it, or are they quite convinced or taken or almost soothed by a narrative of, it's the West making a lot of stuff up, or Western mistakes, or the West betraying us after Afghanistan?
Is that a question that you would like to put to one particular panelist, or is this for the panel generally?
Whoever wants to dive in.
Who would like to pick that up?
Maybe I can get the ball rolling
Okay.
by saying, an obvious answer to the first question is the army. You've seen it with the floods now, that while even the army has struggled with the humanitarian relief, the reality is it's, for that sort of an operation, is the most functional. It has the helicopters, it has the trucks, it has a very good internal discipline. It certainly functions.
The manpower.
Has the manpower. But it's not just the army. I think other panellists can also talk about other instances in the civilian government. While there's a lot of criticism of it, there are areas where it does function. In terms of the second question, and this is my view being someone who grew up in Australia but has gone back to Pakistan my entire life on many occasions, this is not the entire answer, but certainly part of the answer is that there's a sense that Pakistan's sort of role as a threat to the world is highly exaggerated. That we are the victim because we rightly have, had more victims of terrorist attack, bombings and everything than any other country in recent times. And then when everyone points the finger at us, they're really forgetting that. And in that process, even with Mumbai, I think there is a tendency to kind of ignore some obvious things.
Right. I'll just take a question from here, though I should add, just for the sake of discussion, that, I think it's truer to say, perhaps, that Pakistan is seen to be as much a victim as a perpetrator of terrorism. And, it's a question of balance, and I think that's what Mumbai brought through. But if we could just have a question in the front here.
Yes, my name is Nisar Ali Shah. I'm a journalist by profession. Pakistan has got a lot of crises, new and old. The newer one emanate from the invasion of Afghanistan. And unless the US and the Western countries, NATO, withdraw their troops from Afghanistan, there will be no solution in Pakistan. There will be no security, like Yusuf Zai just mentioned. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I will make a comment and ask a question.
Sorry, we have very little time. Just stick to that question. You've called for the withdrawal of Yusuf.
Couple of weeks ago, drone bombs killed 3 Pakistani soldiers. As a result of it, the Pakistan government closed the Khyber Pass for 9 days. Now, the day they opened the Khyber Pass, the same day the Americans droned again and killed 6 civilians in Pakistan. So Pakistan is not a culprit in terrorism. It's the Americans who are terrorists.
Okay.
And the biggest country
in
the world who support terrorism.
Thank you very much. Please sit down.
You're not very patient,
Well, we have very little time, and I want to give everybody a chance to speak. But I do want to make sure that we've understood your question, which is to say that if US troops were to withdraw from Afghanistan, many of the problems that confront Pakistan today would be eased. Is that your question?
Yes.
Right.
All right.
Would one of you
I'll
like to
take
pick that up, please?
I actually disagree because right now the security situation is incredibly precarious. And incidentally, the 3 Pakistani soldiers were killed in an air incursion by ISAF and NATO helicopters. It was different from drone attacks. There is a certain the attack by the NATO helicopters intruding into Pakistani airspace was taken extremely seriously by the Pakistan government and the military and the media and civil society, because it was seen as a precursor, if you didn't stand up to that, that the next thing would be boots on the ground. So there was a violent reaction in that respect, where the aggression with which the Pakistan government put a stop to that, first of all, they pretty much said, well, you know, we reserve the right to retaliate because NATO said it was an act of self-defense. Our territory, self-defense, didn't make much sense to me. But so that is what stopped that. The drone attacks continue. There has been no let-up in that. And in my personal opinion, I think that Pakistan should actually say, you know what, that's a territory we can't go into, and we're working in concert with the American government to take out identified targets. Having said that, the collateral damage is phenomenal in those drone attacks. I personally have very mixed views about them. But Americans pulling out of Afghanistan, unless Afghanistan is internally stabilized, it will just create more problems, because the movement across the border, and Rahim can add to that, the movement across the Durand line is phenomenal, even with the presence of coalition forces and Pakistani military.
Thank you. Questions? Anyone from the right? The gentleman there.
Thank you. Colin Spurrier from the BBC World Service Trust. As professionals working in the media, I simply wonder what role you feel the rest of the world can play in supporting Pakistan's own media.
Who would like to pick that up?
Okay.
One of the ways in which the world media can help us in that situation is to look at Pakistan not just the terrorism or the violence in Pakistan, but look at Pakistan as a whole. Look at other areas of Pakistan. Look at those of us there who are fighting for human rights, for democracy, for women's rights, for peace, and support and affirm those rights rather than ignoring them and whitewashing them and portraying Pakistan entirely as a country of terrorism and violence. And in that sense, I think Katrina has talked about that also, because it's when the world sees us and just portrays one side of Pakistan, and that's the view that is, and maybe that's a view that Pakistani media also, the hard news part of it, because does put forward, because events like bomb blasts and attacks and all that makes headlines all over the world. But when somebody is like building schools or hospitals or doing that, doesn't really make news, and maybe that's just the nature of the beast. The nature of the 24/7 news media is that you go for the sound bites for the thing, and you don't go in depth, and that's a very damaging sort of a thing in the case of Pakistan right now, I think.
It's a multidimensional country. See it that way, please.
Any questions from the left? The lady here.
Thank you very much. My name is Huria Musaddiq. I'm from Amnesty International. My question is to the panelists that you talked about Islamization in Pakistan. Don't you think that this Islamization of Pakistan was created during the Cold War, when Afghan jihad was promoted from the Pakistan borders, and how ISI was trying to somehow help Afghan Mujahideen by using Islam and Islamization, and that particular issue started in northern frontier provinces, and this is how, unfortunately, now Pakistan nation is paying the price.
Who would like to pick that up?
Well, I mean, if I could just,
Go ahead.
is that, yes, it was, the ISI was involved in that, but so was the CIA. So was Saudi Arabia. Pakistan, one of the problems with Pakistan is its geostrategic location, where it is next to Afghanistan, Iran, India, China, the Arabian Sea, and we're right there. And that whole attempt to jihadize the Afghan war was a war of liberation that was turned into a religious war, very deliberately and very cynically by political powers for political reasons. And that is when when it was used as a political force. We are paying the price for that right now, and I think Rahimullah Saab can talk a lot more about that.
Yeah, the US actually invested about $2 billion in that Afghan war. And the US, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistani ISI, they were partners in this enterprise. In fact, I think they used Islam because that was the most potent force. Otherwise, you could not have this victory over the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. The Soviet Union brought 150,000 soldiers, and they fought for almost 9-10 years. They couldn't defeat the Mujahideen. So, it was an open secret. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, China, even Arab countries, everybody was helping them. And that actually is the reason why we are still facing problems. So I think there was no other way, because as Bina was saying, it was also a war of liberation, because Soviet Union, a big country, occupied a small country and tried to impose a very unpopular regime on the people of Afghanistan. People were in revolt. Pakistan actually became the frontline state, and we are suffering because of that, because the same Mujahideen, they also had Taliban at that time in their ranks. And Taliban then emerged because Mujahideen were fighting among themselves, and Taliban, actually they were hailed initially. They were welcomed because they brought peace. But then they became involved in so many other things. Their policies were not liked. But I think those problems had their origin in that Afghan jihad, supported by almost the whole free world.
Can
so I think that
something?
Certainly.
I would also like to add one point, that remember that the forces that were arrayed against the Soviet Union at that time, they came from all over the world, even Yemen and Bangladesh and Indonesia and Chechnya. And so this Islam was the one unifying and rallying point which was used to bring these disparate forces together. And one point that I really want to add when you talk about the continuing of when the Soviet Union withdrew in 1988, a lot of these people were left with nothing to do, no place to go, all dressed up for a war, and the war is over. And another very crucial point that a lot of people don't realize, many of them married Pakistani women in the tribal areas and continue to live there. So they are foreigners living in Pakistan and in Pakistan's tribal areas whose children are Pakistanis. I mean, they're born there. But they are Yemeni, they are from different parts, Sudan. So what do? I mean, do you send them back to their home countries? No, they've been living here for 20 years. But they continue to hold their very, very extremist positions. They came all the way to Pakistan to fight a holy war, and then they stayed.
Actually, Iqbal Ahmed predicted this, way back when.
Way back when.
With his Terrorism, Theirs and Ours speech in Colorado in 1999, much before 9/11.
Question from the back? You're on the right-hand side, at the back. with the beard. I'll come to you, sir, in a minute.
My name is Katrina Hussein. I'm a corporate lawyer in the city. My question is, rather than acknowledge its problems, whether they...
Sorry, we can't hear you. Could you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, my question is, rather than acknowledge its problems, whether they be religious, political, or even sporting for that matter, why do the ruling authorities in Pakistan adopt a victim mentality rather than look for resolutions to their issues? Is it because they seek to cling on to power, or is it an innate characteristic which has developed in Pakistan since its inception in 1947?
Victim mentality? Having its day?
Okay. First of all, none of us are in the government, so I really can't speak for the government. But there is a slight victim mentality, definitely. The poor me thing. But one thing that is kind of really, really important is that a lot of our problems are not created within the country. They are also being imposed. So the solutions have to come as a discourse. It's not something that you can resolve just within the country. Everything is interlinked. And one of the points that I was trying to really reinforce, and I was talking about the victim, and yes, that we are the victims as well, is because we are beginning to feel that we are always being painted as a bad guy. We are being cornered in a way, pushed into the corner. And there are two choices. Either you cringe or you come out snarling. And at this point, I think that the younger generation is going to come out snarling. And that's where I see the danger.
Thank you. From the front. Anyone from the lady here? The lady here in the front.
I just, Farazara, I have a very small question for Bina. You just stated that the two countries are functioning on war economies? Is that really the case? I mean, if you think about it. And another separate question. When they do talk for prolonged periods of time, as in before Mumbai, did the budgets actually dip down?
No, because the talks, when they talk, the talks don't reflect on the budgets or the economies. And when I say that they're like war economies, I'm talking about, like, for example, India. I think something like 10% of its budget goes into the military, and they're aiming at China. They're seeing China as a threat. Pakistan sees India as a threat, and something like 30 or 40% of Pakistan's budget goes to the army, because even with that, it's a fraction of what India spends on its military budget, because India is 8 times larger, its economy is many times more than that larger. So when I said they're like war economies, I mean that very large percentages of the budgets are going into weaponization and armies and feeding, and into militarization. That's what I meant. And when they talk, India and Pakistan, when they talk, it's so, I think especially since the rise of the 24/7 media, it is counterproductive almost, because they come out, there's journalists asking questions, there's hostile questions, they feel pushed into a corner, and I think that the statements that come out at those points really don't help. And I don't know what really is the answer to that. I think one of the things that we really need to do is to let people meet, lift the visa restrictions, let people visit each other's country, let's reconnect, let's see our similarities, let's cooperate in areas that we can cooperate, and let the governments continue trying to talk. It has to be a process. It's not going to, there's so many expectations every time they talk, there's so much hype, and then it fizzles out, and there's completely like a, what's the word for it? It's counterproductive and it doesn't really work. So I really think that the issue between India and Pakistan, we've identified our issues. These are the main issues between us. There's Kashmir, there's Creek, there's Siachen, there's the water issue and all of these. We need to keep talking about these issues, but in the meantime, why are the people being made to suffer? Why cannot they go and meet their relatives? Why do they have to, somebody dies and you can't go and, see them? And this woman from Srinagar, who's married to somebody in Islamabad, said to me, what good is a dead body? We get the visa. By the time you get the visa, the person is dead. What good is a dead body? What am I going to go there and see the dead body? And actually, a few days after that, her father died. It's heartbreaking, the stories that you hear from both sides. And I just want to stress that it's not just the divided families who suffer with this India-Pakistan thing, or the people who are married across the border. The students who could gain so much with, there's just so much we could really gain from each other.
The last two questions, we don't have much, so I'm going to take the two questions from the right and the left. I think there was the gentleman. Oh, there you are. If you could ask your question, and then I'll ask somebody on the left, and
Thank you. Christopher Pike, a member of Chatham House. I have a very simple question. What's holding the Pakistani state together, and is there any movement for secessionism?
Excellent question. And one from the left. Perhaps the lady there in red.
My name's Maria Arian. I'm a member of the APML.
Which is?
All Pakistan Muslim League.
Or you mean General Musharraf's
General
party?
Musharraf's party, that's right. It's not a question related to him, so.
I hope not.
I want to ask, with the current climate of Pakistan, political instability, economic problems, and social instability, is this setting a stage for a social revolution? And if so, what sort of role would the media play in such a situation? Thank you.
Well, two excellent questions, which sort of will, I suppose, put everything into context. What's holding us together? Rahimullah.
If you remember, Pakistan already has been dismembered once.
Indeed.
We had East Pakistan, and that has gone away and become Bangladesh. But since then, I must say that we are very resilient. We have faced so many crises. Even now, there are so many crises. And somehow, the Newsweek actually called us the bravest nation on earth. So the fact that we are coping, I think, that's great, and I think we will survive.
That was after Newsweek, I think in 2007, called us the most dangerous place on earth.
Yes, exactly.
Can't trust these journalists.
If I can add something.
Of course, Mr. Babar.
Very quick. I've met a lot of policemen manning barriers in Islamabad in Peshawar, men who have lost limbs in hospital. There are problems in Pakistan, there's identity issues and everything. But these are people who aren't paid very much money. There must be something motivating them. They know that there's going to be a good chance they could die or lose a leg or something. We've seen with the floods now, people somehow survive. Pakistanis are very determined people. Maybe that's not unique to Pakistan, but it's, I think, something that we don't often talk about.
Anybody else wants to respond to that?
I think we'll take the other question.
Okay, and perhaps the question about a social revolution in Pakistan. I wonder who's going to lead that.
Okay,
General Musharraf.
Not there's a social revolution in Pakistan. I don't know exactly what you mean by social revolution, but something is going to give in Pakistan. And I don't have a crystal ball to say what, but the tension and the pulling and the tugging, so that kind of ties into your question. There are forces at play over here that are stretching the country to its limits. And the only thing holding it together right now in many ways is the Pakistan army, not for altruistic reasons, but it is an entire raison d'etre for existence. And remember that the Pakistan army is a conglomerate. It's not just an army. It has the largest business interests in the country. They own banks, they own fertilizer and cereals and real estate.
And hairdressing saloons.
So you have to understand that is a very powerful force in Pakistan. And they have a lot to do with whenever the strains become too sharp, you see interventions, either subtly or aggressively. So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind. And there is one comment I want to make totally at the end. So if nobody asks a question, I will say what I have to say. But take a question.
I just want to add, in terms of what's holding us together and social revolution, it's sort of a related sort of a thing, which is that, about the tensions that Katrina talked about. This is a country where, at the same time, parts of it are really medieval. Really medieval. Where customs and traditions and thinking is medieval. And then you have almost futuristic, so there's part of that, moving into the modernized era. You have, so for example, the violence against women issue. There's a lot of violence against women, yes. It happens in India as well. One of the reasons is because when women go against the traditional path, against what's expected of them, against the cultural norms and traditions, sometimes there is a violent reaction to that. You will not hear about the hundreds and thousands of cases of women who actually marry men that their mothers and fathers don't want them to marry. You'll only hear about the case in which they are attacked for doing so, whether it's in India or in Pakistan. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that there is and Rahimullah Saab touched upon it when he talked about the desire for education for girls' schools in the tribal areas, and that is something I see universally across Pakistan, not just in the tribal areas, in the rural areas, in areas where before they didn't want a school, and they're going and they're asking the NGO that opened a school in the next village that they had prevented from coming to their village 10 years ago. Please would you open the village now in our school? So there is a much, much greater desire for education. There's a much greater awareness of your human rights. Like I said about, for example, women standing up for their right, the right to marry who they want, or the right for education, going against the traditions. There is a great awareness at a very at a very grassroots level. Peasants who are standing up to landlords and refusing to be abused anymore, for example. And all of that. And I think that is part of the whole, the process that we are going through, the tumult that Pakistan is going through, does have to do with that tension between the medieval customs and traditions and moving into the modern age and the age of information, where every second person seems to have a cell phone.
Well, can I make one comment that I really want to share with
Very
everybody?
briefly, because we must now begin to wind up.
I really want to just share one thing, is that when I talked about the discourse being hijacked by terrorism, and then you talked about Mumbai, one of the very important things, the scariest thing in the world, is that when India reacted so sharply to the Mumbai attacks, and of course it was a huge event, I'm not going to say that, but to tie the entire Pakistan-India dialogue to that one event is playing directly into the hands of the terrorists, whom it does not suit to have Pakistan and India at peace. If the Pakistan army stays tangled up on the border with India, then they cannot prosecute the war against terrorism on the western border. And right now, my fear is that if there is another attack in India, and it is very much in the interest of the terrorists to mount that attack, and the Pakistan army gets diverted, the war against terrorism will be lost completely.
Well, as they say, we could go on and on with this, and I'm left, as indeed many of you in this room, I'm sure, with the question of Pakistan's incredible resilience. What is it that makes this country survive and overcome these incredible challenges? I think the answer to that is one that does not present itself in the immediate future, nor does it necessarily open itself to a discussion here within the time constraints we have. But I think it is fair to say that the international community cannot countenance the risks of Pakistan going under. That has been made abundantly clear. And I think if only because of that we will continue to see Pakistan survive, certainly in my lifetime and possibly even in yours. It remains for me simply now to thank our excellent panel of journalists, excellent panelists who've brought with them these wonderful insights. And of course, thank you all for being here with us this evening.